Excellent.
Is the mic audible?
Yep. And I'll double check.
Hello?
So while we're getting all set up, I'll pull up our chat here. Thank you to Chris for making this possible, for all of you for being here, and for folks joining on Zoom. I'll double check. I saw a name that I saw previously, Rohan, if he's here with us, or Matt Grubik. Can you hear us online? All right. Just drop a note in the chat and just double check everyone here. Are you able to catch up on the mic? I see thumbs up. Beautiful. Still double checking with our folks at Zoom. Thanks, Matt, for the confirmation. Well, welcome to our presentation today. We are very fortunate on the eve of the PittChallenge Hackathon to welcome one of our best sponsors that we've had in the last 6 years of the event. Of course, they're all fantastic and the best sponsors we've had. But no one has ever offered to do a seminar that introduces to both our students in the PharmD track, our engineers, and our MS and PhDs in our field of pharmaceutical science, the insight into the world of digital, which I hold near and dear. As Ravi Patel, the lead innovation advisor, it's always fun to ask what's new and useful in the world. And there's few perspectives as valuable as those who practice in it, such as Tom and Basker today. They'll be introducing themselves, but I just wanted to say thank you all for joining as a product of the Pharmacy Innovation Lab. Do check out any of our courses, our events like our hackathon coming up, and our events like these where you get a chance to learn from people in practice. And as I turn things over to Basker, Gumadi, and Tom Julian joining us from Digital and Pharma, please join me with a warm welcome. And we will have questions at the end.
Right. Yeah. So thanks, Ravi, for the great introduction and then for the collaboration. So Tom and I both love to speak, and it's almost like we being the sponsor, so that way somebody can come and listen to us when we speak, and they're not running away from us. So it's like we are paying you guys so that way you guys can paying the university so that way you guys are test subjects. So and listen to us for the next half an hour or 25 minutes. So my passion is digital health. How many of you in the audience know what digital health is, or have a remote understanding of what digital health is? Can you kindly raise your hands? So could you define what digital health means to you? And what's your name? Cole. So Cole says, digital health means improving access to technology so that it can improve healthcare, right? And then Anissa, can you explain to me, or can you share with us, what digital health means to you?
Yeah, like several times using technology, both hardware or software, to facilitate various healthcare opportunities, to increase access and to make it easy on patients and all the stakeholders involved.
Right. So for the people on the Zoom call, what Anissa is saying is that improving access to software and hardware for patients so that they can get more benefits out of using this technology for their condition. Yeah. So digital health can mean several things to several people, but the focus of digital health that we're talking about today is mainly to help patients dealing with a condition so that way it becomes part of their digital ecosystem that they can rely on. And our main focus is in clinical trials. There's a lot of information out there about a patient that we can digitize and we can integrate to electronic health records that makes it easier for a physician or a pharmacy technician to understand what is their patient's longitudinal health history. So that's one aspect of digital health. But what we're going to talk about today is, can digital health be a companion app to support patients suffering from an anxiety or depression? So that's how it's actually started. In some of the success case studies, if you look at the case studies of where digital health has been successful, it has been very useful in helping patients suffering from anxiety and depression to be the digital companion. Quite often, you heard about cognitive behavioral therapy, where a patient is suffering from an anxiety. It's a thought that they have in the head, but it's not real. And then they want to do something with that particular thought. They're take some radical actions. So it could be a panic attack that they can have. But if you can calm the patients at that very point of time, to it like a person or somebody calming them, saying it's a thought, nothing's going to happen to you. and then assure them that everything is going to be okay at that point of time, they will come out of that thought and then can carry it forward. We often, like, before taking an exam or like, before a stressful event, those running thoughts also go through our mind. And it's about like, calming ourselves that everything is going to be okay. So digital intervention does that. Digital intervention takes the work away from a person being a counselor to the patient suffering from anxiety and depression. And it intervenes the person by understanding their behavior through that longitudinal health. So digital health can collect information about that individual, understand their journey, and understand the trigger points of their anxiety, and understand what works for that individual. Not everything is going to work for an individual. Each individual. So the algorithm understanding the patient behavior and trying to modify the patient behavior through a digital intervention. So digital intervention to me is a healthcare app trying to understand the patient behavior and trying to modify the patient behavior in fighting a condition. So it's about modifying the patient behavior that I want you to take away with. And that's where digital health can play a strong role in. Quite often, people suffering from diabetes or other debilitating condition, they can either modify their health habits so that way they can actually treat their disease themselves, or they can take a pill. So it would be easier for a patient who's suffering from a treatable condition like diabetes to modify their health habits so that way they can actually treat the condition themselves rather than popping a pill. Because adverse events do come with taking a pill. So digital intervention can be a standalone treatment in some situations like diabetes and anxiety and depression, or it can be taken in combination with a drug. So patients suffering from anxiety can take a pill, but if they need some guidance on the right amount of sugar, let's say the person has craving of sugar and cannot avoid, it's that the digital app, based on the monitoring of the glucose level through hardware, like Anisa is saying, can advise the person saying that, okay, if you still have a craving, this is the amount of calories that are allowed. This is will go beyond your glucose level. So that way the person doesn't go from type 1 to type 2. So it can actually keep the condition in check or totally cure the disease by recommending them through some nutritional changes. Oh, okay, so I have, all right.
Doing the absolute right
Okay.
thing.
So, okay, this is where the camera is placed. Okay, perfect. So, I'm going on to go to the next slide. Say it again. You can do something. We can just do that.
There we go.
Oh, thank you. So this is my background. I'm very passionate about innovation, and the last 10 years of my life have been spent in using innovation to support clinical trials. How many of you understand like how a pharmaceutical company is structured, like in the audience here? Kind of. All right. So basically, what pharmaceutical companies do is pharmaceutical companies bring out innovative medicines to support patients, in their journey of fighting a disease. And the way pharmaceutical companies are structured is you have each drug that comes out into the market have to be going through a clinical trial. You have phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and phase 4. Phase 1 is so the drug, before they test it on humans, they have to test it on animals for toxicology. And we're trying to be better at that. And then, can we, instead of testing it on animals, can we test it in an in silico animal model to kind of prove toxicity? As pharmacy students, you understand that each drug is toxic, right? Like there's a toxicity effect. In some situations, that toxicity is what actually cures the condition. But you need to make sure that you introduce the right amount of toxicity in the drug. It doesn't go beyond a particular level. So there's a balance between the efficacy and toxicity. So what is the right dosage that you want to give it to the patient so that the drug is actually treating the condition, at the same token, not introducing too much toxicity by introducing adverse events. So you test the toxicity in animals, and then phase 1, you test the dosage, and phase 2, you test the efficacy, And phase 3, you test it against the standard of care. So if you're introducing a new medicine, if there's a drug out there in the market that's already good for treating cholesterol, so your new innovative medicine that you're trying to bring into the market is going to be doing a comparator study against what's available in the market, like the standard of care, to show that there is a value in this drug in coming into the market because it's 15% better or it's helping more patients, more diverse patients. So that's what you want to do in phase 3. Phase 4 is once the drug gets approved by the regulatory authority, you conduct real-world studies to gather enough evidence. Because in a clinical trial, quite often you're not increasing the exposure of the drug to more than 3,000 patients, depending upon the disease condition. So this is how like clinical trials are done in phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 to phase 4. So I spent a lot of time in clinical trials, and what interested me in clinical trials is that's where the majority of the money is invested. So I chose, applying my innovation models in clinical trials to come up with something disruptive that can change the pace at which we bring new drugs to the market. So quite often, for companies to come up with a drug, they spend a lot of money, and the average cost of coming out with a new drug is costing pharmaceutical companies about 10 years and $1 billion. So that's the average cost. So for example, in today's condition, majority of the diseases are already treated. The two major ones that pharmaceutical companies are still trying to work on is Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And you probably, I don't know how many of you follow the news, Biogen has been working pretty hard on coming up with a treatment for Alzheimer's. They're not there yet, but I think hopefully in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be at a state where we can treat Alzheimer's. So this is the process of clinical trials. So I used my design thinking and innovation methodologies to kind of work on clinical trials so that way we can actually change the process or technology to bring drugs more cheaper and faster into the market. So, and one cool fact about me is I make music videos. How many of you guys here, apart from your regular day-to-day work, do something for fun? So all of you, that's good. That's a good balance. I always tell my kids that academics are important, but you need to have a passion and a hobby, because sometimes when stress hits, you need to kind of lean onto that hobby to kind of to give you that stress release, right? So and I picked on this habit during a pandemic. So what I do is I take original soundtracks, and then for a birthday event or if somebody has a major event in their life, I kind of change the lyrics of that song, and then bring in pictures to kind of suit to that person, and then they all love it. So that's some cool fact about me. So Tom.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Julian, and I work with Basker at Gilead, and we do some amazing things every day, each and every day. We get to explore the best and the newest types of technologies and try to infuse them into helping clinical trials run better. And I got involved in clinical trials after spending years working in digital, with startup companies and with health insurance companies. And it really brought forth a sense that I wanted to get things done, and I wanted to be an entrepreneur in basically everything I did. So being able to work in clinical trials was a totally different world for me a couple of years ago. I didn't know anything about it. And when I first arrived I started at BMS in my first pharma job about 7 or 8 years ago. And I discovered that clinical trials there was an incredible amount of machinery that worked within pharmaceutical companies to help run clinical trials. I think I already told this analogy today, but I'll do it again. But it's like if you're thinking about an aircraft carrier and the researchers and the doctors and the people that fly the planes, everybody else that works on the aircraft carrier is helping to get those planes into the air. And that's the same way that clinical trials run. There's an incredibly huge amount of operational capabilities and functions and people that are working on databases and such and technologies to help those clinical trials run better. And what's the point of that? The point is that if you can shift and change how clinical trials run just a little tiny bit in one project, if you can accelerate a clinical trial by 2 weeks in one project, and you can accelerate it by 3 weeks in another, or save money or time in some other way, eventually that all adds up. And what does that mean for patients? It means that a patient can get a drug faster than they thought that they'd be able to. A drug comes to market 6 months ahead of time. And that person that was desperately in need of that drug, they'll be able to potentially have better quality of life. And when we talk about what research does for patients, the same rules apply. If you can improve life or extend life by 6 months in one clinical trial, then the next clinical trial comes along and that extends life for 3 months, that all adds up. If you look at the hockey stick charts for breast cancer research, those have changed over the last 20 to 30 years to bring real hope to patients, and that's what we do, and that's what's exciting about our jobs. I've never ever, I swear to God, I'm not kidding you. I'm never bored by the things that I do with Basker and our team. I always find that every day I wake up to a new adventure and something new to try, something new to succeed and fail at, and to get up and try it again. So definitely would say that it's definitely the most valuable and rewarding part of my career so far. So I also like to do things on the side. I like to have a life. I'm a writer. I've gotten to publish a novel, and a couple of years ago, I actually got to meet with the producers of Star Trek, which was really cool. They didn't buy anything off me, which is why I still work in pharma. But that was really neat. Also, play a lot of tennis obsessively with a bunch of other dads who think we're in the French Open. So there you go.
Right. So what is it? What is it that we would like to do today is kind of, maybe walk away so that you guys can walk away with what digital health is and how digital health is important in terms of patient engagement and wellness. And kind of talk a little bit about some case studies where digital health is already helping drug development. And we also want to learn from you. And, I want to make it more interactive rather than, we just actually talk about topics that we think are important. We want to understand from you what is important, what is one topic from digital health that is an enigma for you, like that you would like to know more, or are there any questions around one topic that we can help you with? This is all about, you are the new generation, right? Like, you're going to school, and one of the main objectives, I was talking to Ravi earlier, is one of the main objectives of why we're doing this at University of Pittsburgh is us giving to the community. We want to, number one, increase the awareness of clinical trials in young minds like you, so that way tomorrow you can explore that as a field of interest. And also, we're conducting this hackathon so that we have brilliant ideas. And Anissa is a great example of somebody that was selected by Gilead, and she's going to be working with us as an intern. And she's been a great help at Gilead. And so if you have great ideas and if we find the right and the bright minds here, we also have an opportunity to work as interns at Gilead. So feel free, talk to us, and be open and bring your ideas at the hackathon, and even in the seminar. Like, if there are any topics that are of interest to you, like, talk to me, and so we can actually address those topics in this next 10 to 15 minutes. So we already talked about what happens in a clinical trial. So this is where the testing is happening in the preclinical. This is where the toxicity is tested, and phase 1, where the dosage is tested, and phase 2, where you're testing for the efficacy, and phase 3, where you're testing for where you're doing the comparative studies of your drug against the standard of care that's already available. So that's efficacy and safety. So this is something that I wanted to talk about. What is digital health, right? This is a great slide. And I want you to take down, like, if you're interested to do further research, there is a society, a digital Dime Society, and they have been actually putting together some standards in terms of digital health, on how industry as a whole can talk about what is digital health. And this is just a classification of, if you take a digital health, it's an overall superset. Digital medicine, digital therapeutics fall under that. And this is the area that we currently focused on, which is the digital therapeutics we talked about. These can become companion apps to support patients who are dealing with a chronic condition. And right now, there are several apps that are available in the market for chronic conditions, where you go to a doctor if a person is suffering from ADHD, the doctor can either prescribe a medication or they can prescribe the person suffering from ADHD to play a video game. And you'd be thinking like, why a person is already suffering from ADHD? Why do you want to introduce a video game? The objective of the video game is to hone on those factors of a person getting distracted to focus on completing a task. So quite often when kids are playing video games, they're so focused on doing a task and they're in the moment because somebody's attacking them. They have to either defend themselves or like they have to do something to score a point. So these are examples of apps that are already being used in the current scenarios where a doctor is actually prescribing. So these are called prescription drug therapeutics. So for a condition, the patient can be given a drug or can be prescribed an app or both to treat the condition. So these are the category. And I'll also talk a little bit about the FDA's stance on digital therapeutics. So if it is an app that is, let's say, treating a simple condition and it doesn't have serious impacts of the patient not using the app, it can be category 1 or category 2. But think of an app, let's say you want to introduce an app to an asthma patient and you're telling them on techniques to breathe. So quite often this patient was suffering from asthma, they could have an asthma attack where they're not breathing properly. So think of an app, the patient is, let's say, on a serious attack. If the patient is in the moment, you can have a digital app to calm them down and then have them slow their breathing and then take deep breathing so that way they can be coming out of an app. So let's say, let us say that one of you came up with that school app. So it will be classified as a critical or a category 3 app, because if the app is not able to treat the patient's asthma attack, the person could end up dying. So this is this extremity. I'm just giving an example of the type of categories the digital apps can fall into. This is not there yet, but I'm just giving an example so that you can think about the categories. It can be approved. It doesn't have any impact on patient's condition, but it could also, with the app, if the patient is depending upon the app to save a life-threatening condition, then it will be classified as a category 3. So these are the types of categories that these digital therapeutics fall into. So on this slide, I want to kind of make it more engaging. Is there anything that comes to your mind that I can talk about? Like, are there any topics that you have in your mind, or any terminology that's not clear to you that I can explain? I want it to be more a dialogue. So please make that happen. Yeah. So that's a great question. So, I'm glad that you asked this question. So quite often when we do clinical trials, we write a protocol and say, if the patient is given this drug, here is the outcome that you're focusing on. And if the outcome is met, then the drug is a success and the drug gets approved and you prove to the regulatory authority. So in terms of introducing a digital app, depending upon the intended use. So it's all about intended use. So is the intended use of the digital app to improve the quality of life? Is it helping the patient walk more? Is it encouraging them through a digital intervention? Hey, time for your 6 o'clock walk. Hey, or is it actually inducing some kind of a calmness in their life so that they're able to sleep better? So sleep quality, physical activity, and other quality of life factors could be outcomes of a digital app. So you classify them as outcomes of the digital app, and then you do a 6-month study on patients using the app, on the engagement of them. Then you can actually, because digital is quite easy, right? I say that because you can say how many patients logged into the app. You can have clear statistics and how much time did they actually spend on it. So you have these statistics, and then in the end of the 6 months, you can see what is the quality of life, the quality of sleep like. And there's also a device called Actigraph that you can put on a patient when the patient is sleeping. So if the patient is moving too much, you can tell that the patient probably didn't have a proper sleep quality. Well, the patient is still and sleeping better, then that means that the patient is actually has an improved sleep quality. And if the app can also, taking into consideration the patient is actually wearing the app, and if the patient is actually walking more, you can show that there's an increase in physical activity. We cannot control if the patient is taking the app and giving it to their 6-year-old or the 19-year-old. So the person is actually somebody else is doing the physical activity. We cannot control that. But these are some outcomes that we can measure. That's a great question. Yeah.
That we have evidence on that, well, and also, how does it vary from, for example, older people compared to younger people, more like,
Right.
flexible in using,
Right.
being welcoming to using. So how does that fit in?
Sure. That's a great question. So for the people on the Zoom call, Anissa was talking about adherence on how are different types of patients using this. So before I go into the slide, I just would like to. So there is like, as you all know, right? There's a new app, and like you download the new app, and there's probably several new apps, and we download that, and like we play it for some time. Unless they have the stickiness factor, we're not going to use it. And so that stickiness factor is important, right? And then the second part is also, it has to be part of your lifestyle. So let's say somebody said, there's a great app, because while I was doing these music videos, somebody told me there's a great app where you can do reface. So we can actually take the face of Tom Cruise and, put my friend's, Tom Julian's face, and then make Tom Julian look like Tom Cruise, right? But, but I'm not going to use that app unless it's got like something useful, and it's actually can integrate with everything that I'm doing. So I'm going to download that for that one particular video, and then it's going to sit on it, and then I'm probably going to delete it, right? Similar to this example that I just gave you, a patient might get interested in an app that can help them temporarily, and that's a term called digital fatigue, right? We all have digital fatigue, and then that stickiness factor goes away. So you want to make sure that that particular app is somehow integrated into the person's existing digital ecosystem. So what you're trying to build is, you're trying to build a digital ecosystem, so that way it revolves, the app is part of that digital ecosystem, and it can integrate with everything else. So one great example of our commercial success was Livongo Health. How many of you here know about Livongo Health? Livongo Health? Yeah. So that's why, we have, and your focus is? Right. 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 Great. So, from an economic perspective, you should be like, the cost of Livongo Health was $8.5 billion. The company called Teladoc bought Livongo Health. All it started was they created a website and brought all the diabetes patients together. And then they had a stickiness factor, and then they integrated several different components of what a diabetes patient deals with it. Just think about able to bring in like several different diabetes patients onto an app. And the reason Teladoc paid so much money was that number of users on that particular app was quite large in terms of the other diabetes patients on other apps. So that's the example that I give. The reason I give that example is you need to make sure it's integrated into the lifestyle of the patient. And the digital interventions showing a significant potential. So this is where the outcomes driven. So this is on cancer patients, right? So we talked about patients who are dealing with anxiety and depression, and patients with diabetes. You can have those apps, right? Now you can argue when a person is actually dealing with cancer, the shrinking of the tumor is what actually going to measure whether the patient is getting a proper outcome or not. But apart from that, when a person is suffering from a disease, it's not just that one disease, it's a condition that the person is in, right? So, and there are several different other concomitant factors that the person is dealing with. The person is probably also anxious that, hey, I got cancer. Am I going to live for 6 months? Am I going to live for 9 months? Or depending upon the type of cancer, if a person has got breast cancer, I want to, let's say if it's treatable, they're so anxious to get this thing out of their system so that they can actually start living their life. So they're dealing with anxiety. So if you can take away these conditions of helping the patient to be more calm, introduce some kind of a routine into their life, like a yoga, so that can actually bring in some balance and remove stress. These outcomes have shown that the patients who have actually been monitoring their own condition through digital interventions, they had their increased lifespan anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And these are patients that would otherwise be like, terminal patients. So it's actually a great contribution to the increase in the lifespan of oncology patients. So any other questions on the previous slide? Yeah, please go ahead. Right. So that's a good question. So the question was around what kind of regulatory oversight do we have for digital therapeutics? So there is a regulatory oversight, but if the app is just informing but not treating the patient, yep, or that one. So in this, I mean, if you go to Google, you'll also see that when you do a Google search on software as a medical device, there are different categories, and depending upon the category, then it'll actually fall into type 1, type 2, or type 3. So for example, the example that we talked about earlier, a patient being supported by a digital app that's treating asthma, it'll probably fall under category 3, and it has to go through strict regulatory approval. So you have to conduct clinical trials to, number one, show that the patient is able to use effectively and it's actually helping the patient. So then it actually goes through the same approval process that a drug goes through. But if it's just say informing the patient and if it's actually taking their let's say glucose level and then informing them saying, hey, time for you to take a walk. It's okay for you to take that that favorite candy so that way you can increase your sugar level. So that's an informative. So you don't need an approval for that. So depending upon the intended use, you have to go through that approval. Yeah.
So I have a question for. So how do you say you want to promote? How can you promote like the patient with less accessibility to like digital health? Like maybe say like patient that has a lower income or like doesn't have a smartphone that have the access to the app,
Right.
or patient like in the area that with unstable like Wi-Fi and they say
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And what's your name?
Stefan.
Stefan. So Stefan's question is basically, how do you make sure that patients that are low on the income zone or like low on their economic affordability have access to the digital apps? So that's a great question. That's a struggle that we're having. So we want to kind of have digital reach a large number of people, but digital. So that's another theme that we have in the hackathon. One of the themes that we have in the hackathon is what are the other options where digital is not an option? So if digital is not an option, let's say countries like, so we were also looking at some situations where HIV patients, right? We want to kind of have a digital companion to support them with an app. But if majority of these patients are coming from countries like Somalia and Africa, where they don't have access to a smartphone, how do we make sure that they're engaging in their condition? In those situations, we're thinking about, we need to take into consideration the local economic situation and say, is there a possibility where we can send healthcare workers, or in a community setting, the patient is more engaged, and then on a weekly basis, somebody is checking on them, so that way it's much more engaged. But even with not economic criteria is not the only factor, but Anissa also brought up earlier about situations where the patients are, let's say, quite older, and then they got already too many phones, and they don't want to deal with it, right? So let's say, think about like we already have our primary phone, and then you're now introducing another, let's say in a clinical trial, we tried and say, okay, patients, please come onto this clinical trial, and that's a great benefit. You're going to have an Apple phone, and then you will have this app, and we want you to do this step of activities for the next 6 months. We thought that because we're giving away a cool Apple phone, patients will come. The enrollment was poor because they said, I don't really care. Number one, I already have a phone. I don't want this to be another phone that I want to deal with, and I don't really care about Apple phone. I know I'm a cool Android user, so that's one factor, right? So you want to make sure you take away these factors. So we said, instead of actually giving the patient's phone, we developed an app that can be used both on Android as well as iPhone, and it's called Bring Your Own Device. The patients actually bring in their own device, and then we install the app with their permission on their phone. So that's one factor. And for patients that are, let's say, 65 and older that don't have digital awareness, how do we, it's about education. Maybe once it's all about that inertia. They think that they cannot do this, but once if we have a proper site coordinator walk through the process, they're a bit comfortable, and then they probably will overcome. And it's all about human-centered design. You need to take all of this into consideration when you're designing your app, so that way the stickiness, there's engagement, and then human-centered design that is there. Can you help me understand what is that? Maybe it's a poll. If you guys can maybe think through what is that one app that you greatly like, And that you was like, wow, this is a great invention. I cannot do it with this app.
I would probably say my Discover credit card app that shows like my credit card balance, how much I have, because I think it helps manage my personal finances much better.
So you like the user interface, and like, it's part of your, like, yeah. And you are watching Rahel? Rahel says it's his Discover credit card app, and
Because I get a good laugh out of it.
all right,
So.
yeah. All right, so Ian, right? Cold. For Cold, it's the Twitter app. TikTok. I really like TikTok. It kind of so addictive that once you start, like, you can't stop, like, and it's so addictive. And what is the other one?
Just like the Apple Photos app.
Apple Photos app. Yeah.
I have a question for you, kids. Can you tell us about apps that you thought, hey, this is going to be amazing, and you download it to your phone, and like 2 weeks later you forgot about it? What are some of those, like, why do you stop using certain apps?
A lot of ads would pop up, like one of these, a lot of games that I have tried on downloading, but I never installing because there was just multitude of ads popping up and it's
Yeah.
happening.
A lot of ads. How about expectations?
When you look at, like, before you download, like, they always give you like the images of some of the things, and they always represent and show what it's like way too high, like, what to expect. And then when you download it, you realize it's like not as good as they advertise it to be. So then you just kind of forget about it and actually do it.
I would say a better substitution. I would say, like, if you find like a better version of like the app that you downloaded before, you literally just like never use it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like for us, like in our class, we're using like two major forms of resource, like the group chat and Slack. Like, I never use Slack because I felt like group chat basically like covered everything, and then Slack basically just like a substitute. I'm not gonna use it, so that's why I downloaded it, but I just literally forgot it.
Good. Thank you.
I'd also say like low engagement as well. If I download an app, but not a lot of people are using it and I can't interact with them, then I'm most likely not going to use it. Because it's like a big component of that app is like interact with other people who just don't want to interact with. Most likely they wouldn't use it. Like for Slack, for instance, if we have a class group,
Right.
chat on Slack, not a lot of people use it.
Right.
So it's very underusable.
Yeah, that's a good one, because prior to Facebook, Google launched an app called Orkut. I don't know if you guys, that was probably several years ago. Like, you guys were probably still in high school or middle school then. And I got on Orkut, but there was nobody to interact with. And like, there was a lot of colleagues, a lot of my friends from India, like, they got on Orkut, but Orkut didn't kick off for some reason. And then Facebook, so that's a very good example.
This is probably like a less common one, but like storage space is definitely something to consider. With everything now, especially, even though we're getting more storage, but all these other apps are also increasing storage space as well. So
Right.
Kind of prioritize which apps like going on and which like don't, and then if you give a lot of storage, then I think it's like outweighing the benefits of it.
Yep. Good one.
Do you trust when an app stores your personal information in the cloud?
Say that again.
Do you trust it when an app stores your personal information in the cloud?
It depends.
Depends.
I feel like it at this.
Hey, Mr. Finance app guy,
Yeah.
I want to get your perspective.
I don't, but then thinking about it, I fully have very rarely looked at the terms and conditions for everything. So I think it's always at something where you have that huge opinion where you're like, I don't believe in it,
Yeah.
but you never follow through. So now I'm kind of nodding my head because I want to say to you guys, I always am like, I don't believe in that. I believe in that. I don't feel comfortable, but that would just be lying. And I know.
So you're-
100% bring this up.
So you're okay with the convenience outweighs the potential
Yeah.
risk.
Especially being in pharmacy school, there's now that time where it's, this is just an example last week. My mom sent me like a text at these Vans I wanted, like a shoe brand. They had like the $20 shoes. It was on PacSun. And Axum had all these terms and conditions, but I didn't care.
Right.
I was like, oh, this one of those $20 shoes. I ended up getting that. But in the end, again, I didn't look at those terms and
Right.
conditions. Later that week, I think this was a little bit while back. They had like an email outbreak where people were getting personal information. So that made me a little bit apprehensive, but in the end, if I had to download it again for another pair of cheap shoes, I would.
All right.
Did you wear them today? All right.
And you were about to say something from your experience, or we were going through that line now?
I would say, I think this has to go with adherence and stuff. So I used to use actually, which is a like calorie like macro tracking app, and it took a lot of my time. Or like every single
Right.
day, you have to list out every single like food and the ingredient, and then as an alternative, there was like another app that you just take a picture. So like obviously like the first one would be.
Got it. Right. So for the people on the Zoom call, maybe you're not able to hear all these comments, but I like to summarize that. So among the several different polls among the poll that we've taken, you saw several different considerations, right? In a small group, just consider that like each one has a specific interest. Like one was talking about storage space, one was talking about stickiness, other was talking about like an ecosystem. So when you develop this app, the reason I asked this question is like when you're developing this app as a part of your hackathon to solve a problem for, let's say, patients also come in different shapes and sizes, different age groups, depending upon the disease criteria, right? So you need to take all of that into consideration and then figure out like what is that common ground that satisfies the needs of. You cannot satisfy each and every patient, but at least like if you come to, let's say, 60%, even 60% is a great number. But if you can even aim for that, like for the majority of the patients, then you're able to solve the problem. So this is where software as a medical device is, where previously we were taking the drug, and now we are able to kind of move them from drug to a digital medicine or a combination of a drug and a digital medicine. So that's what software as a medical device is.
I think this speaks a lot to your question of whether they're regulated or not and what kind of evidence that they gather. What's really interesting about software as a medical device is that it's prescribed, which sounds really strange. No one is prescribed to download apps or such, but when it's combined with the actual therapeutic nature of taking medicines, having your doctor be able to monitor what's going on with your health, having the AI potentially loaded into the app, help to accelerate or, like I say, supercharge the medical side of it is really interesting and important. And one thing that Basker and I always talk about is the factors beyond the drug. Oftentimes, things like adherence, things like being able to have some support tools in place can help bring benefit to a patient way beyond the drug itself. So those things are really interesting and really, really important. And as you think about what it is you're going to be trying to get through in the hackathon tonight, in these types of things, think about the nature of what we're showing you here relating to software as a medical device. How does it empower the ecosystem? How does it work with other things? I like to use the term plays nice with others. If you ever go to the doctor, you may run into a situation where you need to, for example, exchange or find your medical records. It's amazing to think that medical records are not shared very readily with between doctors and healthcare systems. If that happened, with your bank, if you went from one bank to another and said, "Hey, I need to move these funds over from XYZ account to this account," it could happen in a snap. But medical doesn't behave that way just quite yet. And so SAMDs are gaining traction. Right now, sometimes they're very much on the cutting edge of what we're experiencing and what we're talking about here. But one of the things that we are trying to do is not just find ways to measure what's going on in health differently, but finding new things to measure. So software as a medical device can help us to find and think about medicine and clinical trials in a completely different way and make it so that when someone thinks about getting treatment, they're not just thinking about the pill, they're thinking about their behavior, they're thinking about electronic tools that can also help them out.
I would like to add to what Tom was just saying. Quite often, we know when we visit our primary care doctor, he would ask questions like, in the last 30 days, how often were you feeling this? How often were you feeling that? We have no clue, right? Like, you're going to tell them how you felt for the last 2 days or the last 3 days. Oh, the pain was awful, like, I couldn't deal with it. Or there was no pain. That may not be a true representation of what actually you felt that could be 30 days, that could be 60 days, or that could be 6 months, depending upon when your last visit with your primary care physician is, right? So where the software is a medical device, where you're part of a digital ecosystem, and if we have the discipline to monitor our condition on a daily basis and and record it, this actually provides evidence for the physician to look at, like, this is more data driven. And quite often, if you actually design the tool well, there's probably no patient intervention, meaning you're not at that state right now, but hopefully you guys can come up with an app that integrates the hardware and the software so well that it becomes easy for the patient. Let's say the patient is walking every single day, and since the last 60 days, since he saw the doctor, his physical activity has gone better, or his sleep quality has gone better. That provides empirical evidence for the doctor to say that this particular medicine is better for the patient because he or she is able to get better sleep quality or more physical activity. Yes, Ravi.
Look for the last 10 or 5 minutes of the conversation. I wanted to ask if we can move into Q&A.
Yeah.
I was going to kick off very selfishly with a question. What skills, when you're thinking about solving the problems that you are solving, are you looking for in teammates like those in the audience today? We have our hackathon coming up, which will be a crucible of 24 hours to demonstrate those skills. But as our students are looking for their internships in the coming summer, for their jobs in 18 to 24 months, what skills or what evidence of being able to contribute to problems would help your team?
So you need to think like a data scientist, and Anissa can probably give some guidance on how to think like a data scientist, right? For the particular problem that you're trying to solve, let's say you're trying to develop an adherence app for HIV patients. So you need to do your research and say, in the US, are you developing this for US? Are you developing this for the world? And what's your scope, right? So let's say, in order to make it simple, let's say we want to develop this for the US. You need to do your research and say, how many HIV patients are there? Where are they located? What are their demographics? And what poverty line do they fall in? So you need to do your research so to kind of target. So these are apart from your hard skills, which is like what is the treatment? What are some of the symptoms of HIV patients? So these are some questions that you already have. But apart from this, think about it in terms of patient engagement, human-centered design, stickiness factor that you're all familiar with. These are some things that you want to make sure that you bring into your app for that app to be more not commercially viable. Commercial viability is a separate factor, but as long as patients can accept it, commercial viability comes second. So that's where some of the things that I want you guys to think in terms. And having a background and getting different perspectives greatly helps. I was talking to Jordan earlier about he has different perspectives that then he would then bring those perspectives into his problem that he is trying to solve. So that way those perspectives often help them. Yeah.
Matt, if I can ask, from a regulatory perspective, what are the greatest obstacles to overcome in getting digital health products on the market?
So what are the regulatory obstacles that we have to overcome to get the digital? So it all depends on the intended use, and then I'll talk a little bit about regulatory process. Write down this term called 510K. So there is in a software as a medical device, there is a sponsor and there is also a manufacturer. So when a drug is concerned, like the sponsor and the manufacturer quite often is the same. So let's say Gilead is making the HIV medication, we are the manufacturer, and then we are also the sponsor of the clinical trial. Whereas in a digital therapeutic application, we could potentially partner with another company, like a digital app, that are developers of digital app. So they're actually making the app. So depending upon the intended use, they have to file with the FDA for a 510K submission. So the 510K submission is informing them, the FDA, that this particular app is going to be treating this particular condition. And depending upon the label use, so as a drug has a label use, say, okay, this drug is treated for HIV, you can have a label claim for a digital therapeutic app. So depending upon the label claim and the intended use, and then the seriousness criteria, the regulatory approvals come through. But you do have to go through a 510(k) approval process.
Would we like to wrap? Any last questions? Cool.
Yeah, what are the primary concerns from like the pharma perspective in terms of safety with like and privacy with data related to health? So
that's a good question. So when Tom was asking the question, I was thinking on the same lines, right? So from a sponsor perspective, we as a pharmaceutical company, when we conduct clinical trials or even conduct digital therapeutic trials, we cannot have access to the patient's private information. So there's something called de-identification that has to happen, where you're masking that data from getting that visible to the sponsor. So even the let's say the manufacturer of the record, they can have the patient's primary, like the first name and last name and other private details, but it's very important to practice those rules of privacy. And there's a consent that the patient is made aware to make sure that that information is actually not being used for other marketing purposes, and it's actually kept in a HIPAA compliant role. So privacy and security is also quite important. You want to make sure that this app is also secure. We all know that the importance of security. If somebody is wearing a artificial stent, like an artificial heart, somebody could hack in to that heart and make them stop and demand a ransom. So similar considerations apply for digital apps depending upon their intended use. And security and privacy are quite often important.
Team, one final thing I just want to mention about our hackathon and all that. This is one of my heroes. His name is Julian. I got a chance to meet him when he introduced some events at BMS a couple of years ago. I introduced myself to him. He won a Nobel Prize, so he may be smart enough to remember who I am, but I very much doubt it. But Jim is responsible for something called immunotherapy, basically training the bodies to fight cancer, and it's the next step after chemotherapy. He is one of the most brilliant people in the world. This is also Jim Allison. He is part of a band called the Checkmates, which is the code name for the program of immunotherapy Checkmate. We had like 35 Checkmate studies at BMS. They let loose and jam and they play music, and it's fantastic. He covers Britney Spears songs. It's absolutely fabulous and hilarious. But I want to tell you kids and students and folks that are going to be someday in a position to be ruling the world, and just remember Basker and I here and take care of us in our old age, but have an absolute blast with what's going to happen over the next 36 hours. Everyone's going to be up being crazy, drinking a lot of coffee and being brilliant. Don't forget to be creative and have fun with what's going on, and that we are interested in you as individuals and we want to see you perform in the best possible way. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ravi.
Yeah, and thank you all as our audience for joining both on Zoom and here today. Hopefully you'll have a chance to build on it in either the hackathon, all the courses we have, our future partnerships that we hope to see with Gilead as well. And thank you to our presenters. We have a round of applause.